Yeah, please start, Thomas.
Okay, let's get the party started here. Good morning, everyone. My name is THOÍi, and I am the Chief Global Markets Officer for SSI Securities. We are the dominant securities firm here in Vietnam, and as you will see, not only on this webinar, but in future webinar, we have quite a global reach. I want to thank all of the audience for joining in, and just like SSI, the audience today is quite global, given the subject matter. This is the first of our Access to Vietnam series for 2025. We have quite a few planned this year, but I cannot imagine a more interesting one to start the year out. Given the thousands of people who are dialing in at this moment, I think people do care about Trump's and tariffs. At SSI, we wanted to start the year of the snake, with a bang. I like to call it shock and awe. And I can't imagine a more shock and awe than the panel I have today. I have Frank Kelly from Fulcrum Macro. Frank, I think over time will be a household name in Vietnam and in Asia, given his voice, his intelligence, his insights. I have Eva Yi from THOÍI Securities. Eva is the chief economist of THOÍI, and frankly, the best economist in China. And of course, we have our very own brother THØNG, Mr. THØNG, who is actually dialing in from Hong Kong today because he's on the road speaking to investors about opportunities in Vietnam looking forward. So with that, let me begin the conversation here with Frank. And a little bit more about Frank. If you look at his background, Frank is a Wall Street veteran, a Washington veteran. Frank resides in Washington, D.C. And I've known Frank for, I don't know, Frank, maybe 25 years. This was way before I had gray hair, and frankly, I don't even remember you ever having hair, but that's another discussion. But Frank and I met each other when we worked with each other at Deutsche Bank, and currently as founder and managing partner of Fulcrum, Frank advises some of the most prestigious and prominent investors globally in regards to how to navigate Washington politics and so on. So Frank, I have a list of 100 questions coming in from listeners around the world, but let me start with you with maybe the most technical question. What the heck is going on, Frank? Help us understand here. I don't even know where to start with you, so perhaps I won't start with you even on tariffs. But I want to start with you as help us listeners from Vietnam, from China, from other parts of the world, put a framework on what is going on. And let's begin with that, Frank.
Well, Tom, thank you for having me. Yes, it's been almost 25 years. I remember you used to be, I was 5 years old back then, and you were my babysitter. So I'm giving away that I think you were 30 then. So you're a man now. No, it's so great, Tom, and we've had so much fun and worked so closely together all these years. And it's still great to be close. Look, it is an extraordinary time, I think, geopolitically, I think geoeconomically, and let's just get right to it with Trump and to try and understand what's going on. You know, I had a friend who on election night in 2016 was standing next to the president. And when the final voting tally returns came in, showing that he had shocked the world and beaten Hillary Clinton, he could hear the president-elect muttering under his breath, "Oh my God, oh my God." He was surprised. He was shocked. He didn't think he'd win. And he probably had not been that prepared, as prepared as you could, but you spend 2 years running for president. You don't sit there and have policy debates with your people other than policy statements. What do we say to win the votes? Okay. And then he goes into his presidency, and it's not the easiest of presidencies. He's learning as he goes, right? I mean, Tom, this is as if I were appointed the chief surgeon in Vietnam's most prestigious hospital, and I've never gone to medical school, and I have to learn as I move, right? He's an extremely smart man, and he's able to move quickly, and he learned quickly, but still he was behind the ball. Then he loses. And this is now, I'm going to make a comparison here. This is like a CEO of a major global corporation decides to take a sabbatical for 4 years. And during those, and spends that entire 4 years studying the company, studying his performance, what he could do better, what he did well, what worked, right? And planning. If I were to be, when I come back in as CEO, these are the things I'm going to do and need to be done. And understanding that time is of the essence, because I think for all the listeners here, remember, Trump under US law can't run for reelection. He effectively only has 2 years, not 4, because in 2 years, our Congress will have midterm elections and he may not, his party, the Republican Party, may lose in one or both chambers. And in 2 years, the American public starts to make a turn. They start looking at who's going to run in 2028 and what are the new changes coming. So he has to move at lightning speed, and that is exactly what he's doing. We are 3 weeks into it, and it feels like we're 2 years into it, right? And people are thinking, is he crazy? Is he, I'm being blunt with everybody, is he crazy? Does he know what he's doing? Let me just tell you and get right to it. This was all planned out months and months and months ago, even years ago. These are the things that we have to do to trim down the size of the federal government workforce. These are the things we have to do on the budget. These are the things we need to do on tax. He spent those 4 years not alone thinking and studying. He was working with people, scholars, think tank people, former government officials, and really plotting this out. And with his people around him, this is where we are. So when he did what he did with Canada and Mexico and China in terms of tariffs, what he has done, in which he is temporarily shutting down and consolidating the U.S. Agency for International Development, the huge aid agency. We're not going to stop giving aid. But what he's saying is the only way to make sure there's not waste, fraud, and abuse in the system is to shut it down and clean it up. And then we'll open it for business again. And that's exactly what he did. He sent 8,000 federal government employees home. They're getting paid. Just go home. That's never happened in U.S. history before. And he knows the law and what he can do and what he can't do. And he's moving every day, right? And so this is the much better trained, much better focused, much more knowledgeable Donald Trump at the age of 78. You know the old saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. He may disprove that.
Frank?
Yeah, I'm here, Tom. I'll just keep talking all night if you don't stop me. So,
oh, no,
right.
absolutely. You know what? And look, so I think you've set sort of the baseline that we shouldn't be looking at Trump as mad, random, and so on, that this is a new version of Donald Trump. And this is, certainly we should respect what's going on. I guess putting myself in the seat of people sitting in the region outside of, and probably even Americans, frankly, is there an underlying strategy, an underlying theme, and an underlying framework that we should think about? Because frankly, focusing on his tariffs and all this stuff might be chasing the noise. I mean, I think given what you're saying, you're saying there needs to be a respect here, that there is a plan, there is a strategy, but the world seems to be very distracted with all the little noise on the side. So Frank, help us understand what you see and think is an underlying strategy, and particularly if there are shifts going on that we may not be able to observe sitting over here in our region?
I think, one, this is a president who is not a warmonger. He never was in his first term, right? He was the one who drew up the plans for pulling out of Afghanistan, not accelerating, is a perfect example. In its place, he understands that if you really want world peace, if you want that, it has to come through prosperity. And that means he is very commercial. And this is what he is. He's been, The Art of the Deal was the name of his book, right? Which talked about how you have to structure deals. You have to be tough, the carrot and the stick, right? In front of the mule as it's pulling you, right? You whip it or you give it. So think of it that way. And he's also a person who very much believes that in this new age, certainly with artificial intelligence, with the advancement of technology and medicine, many of the global institutions that have ruled are fossilized. They're brittle. They need to be shaken up. And that the way of thinking needs to be shaken up. And let me give you a good example. The world was shocked yesterday when he did the press conference with Israeli Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu. And really what he said, and if you listen to it carefully and listen to him, don't read what the press said. He said the US will take over Gaza and we'll develop it and we'll rebuild it. And he said, we're going to get everybody out of there. And it's right. He's not particularly articulate, let's be blunt, in sometimes what he's saying, but really what he was saying, and they tried to clean that up today, and I believe it. That is an incredibly beautiful part of the world. And I'm not downplaying the horror and the suffering of the Palestinian people. But when you drill into this and you find out some of the most beautiful beaches in the Mediterranean are in Gaza, some of the best surfing in the world is in Gaza. Trump is saying, why aren't we turning this into the new Hong Kong or Singapore or, right, a huge international city in which we rebuild it, that the US will go in there and get private money, not US money, and we're not putting troops in there, and rebuild the whole place and give people opportunity, because that's the one thing they did not have was opportunity. They were economically hopeless. Let's build this up. So here's what I'm going to say, Tom. Everybody keep an eye on this, that in the coming weeks and months, Donald Trump is going to turn to Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Oman, Turkey. He'll be knocking on the door in Beijing, right? Who knows? He may show up in Hanoi and is looking for investors. Why is there not an international consortium here that we are building this up and we can create a whole city, a whole world, a whole, region and just rebuild it? And there'll be tremendous return on investment, and we can work on this together. That is thinking out of the box. It may be completely unrealistic, but he's challenging the world to think differently. We don't have to be bombing each other. We don't have to be doing terrible things to each other. But quite frankly, if we work together, there's ways of doing this. And I think this goes to the relationship with Vietnam as we start drilling into that, the relationship with Vietnam. I mean, with China. There's a terrible, terrible Harvard Business School word that even in the English language, it's hard to say and you have to explain it, and it's coopetition. It is a fusing of the words cooperation and competition. We can do both. And that is, I think, very much where Trump wants to go in virtually every aspect of trade and in bilateral and regional relationships. I think that's very interesting. This is totally different than anything we've experienced since the end of World War II.
Yeah, so Frank, I mean, look, I think then remember this whole discussion was about tariffs, and I get the joke here, really, in the sense that I think the world and all the questions I've gotten before this call, and I have like over 100 questions now coming in, and they all really revolve around impact of tariffs, what sector works, which sector doesn't. and I have you talking about everything but tariffs. So again, I go back to the question towards, to say to you is the world absorbed with really something that's not central to what are we really missing here, Frank? And then of course I'm going to push you to say, how should we be viewing these tariffs then?
Right. So I'll get right to it in terms of the Canada, Mexico, Canadian tariffs. I had a conversation with one of the Trump economic advisors that I've known a long time, somebody you know from your days as well.
Yes.
And I said, what exactly is going on here? Why was it Canada and Mexico and China first? And so let's be clear on the baseline of this. First, this was the use of tariffs for non-economic reasons. Remember that, right? He imposed the tariffs for homeland security reasons, meaning immigration, illegal immigration coming across the border in Mexico. There's virtually none coming from Canada. Canadians are so nice. I think there was less than 9,000 illegal immigrants who came across the border from Canada, and they're probably just Canadians who got lost driving someplace, and you know how polite they are. We're sorry, we're going home now. And it was homeland security of illegal immigration, and it was health, because it's fentanyl trafficking that's coming through Mexico, and accusing China of producing chemicals or not cracking down enough. These weren't economic reasons. So he will use tariffs for whatever purpose he needs and whatever issue it may be in dealing with another country. It is the ultimate geopolitical weapon for him, short of actual weapons that cause blood. He prefers to use it, and he thinks it gets people to react the quickest, and it gets everybody in the country here and there focused. Now,
Frank, in this case, he did get people to react. In this case, it worked, at least with Canada and Mexico. Is that fair to say? He got what he wanted?
I think so, and it'll be very interesting to see how it even plays out with China, because as the White House aide said to me, and it's typical Trump, and it's sort of talking like a New York tough guy, right? New York tough guy. It's like everybody should go watch old Robert De Niro gangster movies, and that's kind of a little bit of the spirit of Donald Trump. Not that he's a gangster, but just that tough street guy. And as the aide said to me, the reason we did this, because the president wanted to show the world he could walk up to the two largest trading partners he's got, Mexico and Canada, and punch him in the mouth and tell him what he wants, get what he wants, and not have to give anything away. And so, hey, rest of the world, pay attention. If he could start there, and if you're a much more minor trading partner, let's not even argue. Let's just negotiate and get on with it, because it's going to really hurt you. So he did. Now, here's the interesting thing, Tom. What did Mexico and Canada give up? And I would argue it was almost more cosmetic, right? I mean, Canada created a fentanyl czar. I think they probably had some guy who was doing that job focused on getting rid of fentanyl. And it was, instead of, you are the director of counter narcotics, your title on the door is now, you're the fentanyl czar. And there are going to be in stronger border controls. I don't know. Again, it's not like Canadians are streaming across the border into the US. Now, what I think the most impactful thing here, as I say, is a footnote, because I think this is going to be interesting. Donald Trump, when he came to, and it has no direct impact on Vietnam or China, but he designated drug cartels as terrorist organizations. And as part of this, he got Canada to agree to designate them as terrorist organizations. That's a big deal. That means they will go after cartel leaders and cartel operations as if they're going after ISIS or Al Qaeda. We will send in special forces. We will drone strike, and it doesn't matter where you are in the world. We will find you and we will kill you and destroy your operations. This is a huge escalation of things. And, place like Mexico or Bolivia, or right where there's Colombia, I think they're trying to figure this out still. But now you got Canada and the United States working together. And with regard to Mexico, Mexico has stepped up the crackdown on illegal immigration. They don't like it, by the way. This was not hard for them. These aren't Mexicans coming across the border. These are people coming from all around the world. You know, there's Africans and people from the Middle East. I was in Mexico City 6 months ago and meeting with a client. He took me. We're in the 15th floor of a building looking down at a refugee, a legal immigrant camp, and almost all of them were Africans, right? They get over here and they're streaming across. Well, they're going to try and keep them out, do more, and they committed 10,000 troops on the border. Newsflash, Tom, they already had 10,000 troops on the border to try and help control this. It was more President Biden wasn't doing enough on this side. So it looked cosmetic, but these are wins for Trump. We still have 30 days. He gave them a 30-day reprieve. I think there's going to be more that comes out of this, but it's going to be things like, hey, Canada, join us in building a new Iron Dome missile defense thing. Again, has nothing to do with trade, right? Has nothing. So let's see. And I would also say what's very, very interesting, the 10% tariffs placed on China were much lighter than people expected. And that's because Trump has a very different view than a lot of people of China. And I think it is highly respectful, and he wants a grand bargain with President Xi, somebody he really actually respects.
Thank you, Frank. And actually, you're heading the direction I want to take you, because I also want to be respectful of the time and you know, have our other speakers come on. Certainly, lots going back to you, Frank, over the conversation. I think you've already talked about how he sort of views China. Before I transition to Eva, can you put a simplistic way of how you think Trump or the administration views Vietnam?
Well, I found it very interesting that it was one of the very first world leaders that President Trump actually had a conversation with after getting elected was your president, right? It was your leader. There's something about Vietnam that he really likes. Now, look, let's be honest. There was, you know, we had the 2024 trade deficit report came out today. It was, what is it? This, you know, $123 billion trade deficit with Vietnam. So that's going to, you know, you can hear Trump saying, well, we're going to have to fix that. Will there be tariffs placed on Vietnam? Possibly. Does he want to negotiate a deal with Vietnam? Absolutely. And Tom, look, he doesn't run the business anymore. He doesn't run the Trump organization. That is the formal title of it. But, you know, there is no clearer signal of that he sees the importance of Vietnam with the $2 billion golf resort investment that the Trump organization made. They see that as the future of Vietnam, right? And it is, look, it's completely separate from the presidency. It is truly, right? And again, his sons run the business. But I think that just is an indication that, and when we see how trade, in terms of manufacturing, the move from some manufacturers from China to Vietnam, this is optionality for Trump. This is, again, this is great. This is great that that's happening, because I can, you know, if there's lower end manufacturing going to Vietnam and we can encourage more, you know, investment in China, who knows, right? But for Trump, it's not a one, this or that, it's both. And I think he really would love to develop a much stronger relationship with Vietnam because it helps him in his relationships with China. And I would even argue India as well, because you have Prime Minister Modi coming in here next week, right?
Got it. Okay, Frank, let's I'm going to hold you off here. And in summary, what I'm hearing from you is, in spite of all the noise and madness, you believe that this Trump V2 is much more calculating, strategic than most people probably give him credit for. He too has developed and grown like hopefully the rest of us. And then his view, your view on his view on China is respectful and much more strategic than people appreciate. And then, of course, Vietnam. So next up is Eva.
Tom, can I put one more point on this? Sorry, and I don't mean to hog. And sorry, Eva. Look, I think Trump also understands this, that if you want a solution for the war in Ukraine, I've already mentioned development in Gaza. If you want to find a way to better deal with the risk of North Korea, none of that, U.S. is not going to be able to achieve any of those goals unless they are working side by side with China. They cannot be in opposite sides of this. And together, the two true superpowers of the world, they are, right? It's U.S. and China. India's coming along, but it's going to take a while. Nothing happens unless they work together, and it's all intertwined with trade. So I just want to make that last point. Sorry.
What was that word again? Coopetition?
Yeah, it's terrible, isn't it?
Clearly, it's yeah. Clearly, they didn't go to Kellogg School of Management. But anyway,
No.
that's another discussion. So Eva,
Hi.
wow, it's great to see you. And it's, the other thing I need to also acknowledge that not only are you an incredible economist, I would argue you're the best economist in China, but you also work at THOÍI Securities, which is a great friend of SSI. The way that I would introduce Eva is I've known Eva. I was going to say we're old friends, but clearly there's nothing old about Eva. I'm the old part. We've worked together for maybe 10, 15 years and have just seen Eva and her great work for quite a long time. And so it's really a privilege to have you on with us, Eva. Let me just begin. Probably let's start broadly. You've heard all of this, but I'm sure even before this call that you have a sense on how is China viewing all this all this that's going on. And I also would love to get a sense from you, just like President Trump has changed, perhaps, how has China changed in the way that it views and reacts to what's coming from the U.S.? So I leave that, Eva, and you can take it wherever you want to take it.
Okay, I think that's a very big question, and China's a big country with 1.4 billion people. Just like within the US government, and even within a very small circle, even within MAGA, Make America Great Again, there are different layers and opinions and different interest groups. So in China as well, I don't think there's a universal view on how to deal with this, and we need to take that in mind when we analyze what's coming out of China. We look at US, sometimes it was a very simplified vision, but sometimes it works, as in what's been planned, what is theater, and what is just smokescreen. So I think for China, first of all, there are a lot of government departments working separately and together, of course, cooperatively dealing with the Trump 2.0 administration. Leading up to it, I think it's been years of preparation. Just as Frank said, Trump come back this time much more prepared, with a much more professional team. I think Mr. Trump wanted to make hundreds of headlines in his first months in office, and he is succeeding. And China also has been preparing for a second term of Trump. I think that has become more clear after 2022 that he's going to have a real shot in winning the 2024 election. So a lot of things you're seeing out of the gate, I suspect would have been prepared a while back. And I suggest that for investors and observers alike, not to be too hung up on the details. When you see investigation potential, like investigation on Google's business in China, people will be like, Google's business in China? Why did we start there? And the small packages, or China taxing, putting tariff on U.S. export to China, which only takes up about 8 to 9% of U.S. total export to China, which wasn't a great amount to start with, and people get really tangled up with technicalities. I think from a macro point of view, we need to sort of be careful with that, because it's a complicated system. While the overall message, I agree with Frank, that it is going quite a lot better than expected, to be honest. I think after 4 years of the last administration and the campaign, of course, for the 2024 election, market expectation on U.S.-China relationship really dipped to a very low point before the inauguration. And if anything, I think market was a little bit relieved, but they still couldn't figure out whether this is sustainable, what's behind it. I want to say I agree with Tom and Frank that, for lack of better words, there is a method behind the madness. Some of it is planned, some of it was never or was unlikely to be implemented fully at this stage. For example, the tariff on US neighbors, Mexico and Canada. We don't have a Minister of Commerce. We don't have a Commerce Secretary, and in office with a full staff. And the U.S. Essence doesn't have his full staff yet. The USTR GRIA also is not really in place. I think bringing forward the tariff for Mexico and Canada, especially when it's not regarding or targeted at rebalancing trade, could have been just something that was prepared to be scaled back even when it was announced, I think. It wasn't in the script, it wasn't planned. On tariff, I just want to say a couple of things, and on China, I want to say also a couple of points. On tariff, I want to say first, from inauguration and the whole MAGA sort of design of this new government policies, there will be tariff. Mr. Trump referred to in his mind, the great president William McKinley, from the late 1896, 1897. And he praised his approach of tariff and talent. Whether this could work for US today is a big question mark, because US now holds the global reserve currency, which means it does need to have a capital account surplus. How can you have a capital account surplus without a current account deficit? It's very different from before World War I. But anyways, he's going to try. And the fiscal reconciliation bill, given how much tax cut has been promised for how long period of time, without some kind of income from tariff, it's just not going to work. It's nothing personal against anybody, I think. It's just the way the US government needs to reshape its fiscal system, or they think that's the direction we want to go. That's in that context, 10% proposed on China to us is just very gentle, because that was the global tariff rate that was proposed during Trump's campaign back last year, right? And that's why I don't think it will be taken. China would react aggressively to this, and I think there's really, if it's about rebalancing the U.S. fiscal revenue and expenditure, fiscal reconciliation. Maybe most countries won't take offense from it. However, on top of that, there is the art of the deal and deal making, which is destabilizing, to be honest. What happened with Colombia, very lightly, just the country was threatened with sanction and tariff. And, I think the art of a deal is you need to hit them with a big price tag first, and then negotiate down from there. And that was quite destabilizing for the global financial system. That's why you're seeing gold going up when there's a threat of tariff, going up when the threat of tariff is postponed. People just don't know what to do. But back to tariff, I think America first is the message we've got from the inauguration to today. There will be tariff, but from an economic point of view, I'm not sure it will be a very complicated design of tariff targeted at different countries and different products like the last administration did. There could be a differentiation, but it will unlikely to be a very complicated system, which Mr. Trump doesn't like. And in regard to China, I want to say a couple of things. First of all, China did sort of publish a list of U.S. export to China, U.S. goods export to China that will incur a higher tariff rate by February 10th. And there has been media report of the two presidents potentially talking in the next week. I don't think, as I said, the list of products consists about 8 to 9% of total U.S. export to China.
Eva, I'm
sorry.
Oh, sorry. No, sorry for interrupting you.
Yeah, no worries.
I just want to hear you clearly. You said that there's report that the two presidents will be speaking next week. Is that right? Is that what you said?
There are reports, but we cannot confirm it.
Of course.
I read the same news as you.
Of course, no worries, no worries.
Tom, I'll jump in there. Yeah, the president has said there was something. I think they were trying to figure out this week or next week. Yeah.
Yeah, no worries. So what you're saying is that
given what happened to Mexico and Canada, makes sense. Yeah. There's been media reports, and there has been media reports of a clear indication of Mr. Trump wanting to visit China in his first 100 days. So if you look at it from just, if you just reason from here, yeah. I think things will be broadly on hold, despite movements of different government departments, right? But broadly on hold, and shouldn't worsen too much before the two presidents get to meet. That is just a reasonable deduction from a series of events. And it's been very clear that Mr. Trump and his cabinet will try to pursue the American first policy. Yeah. I think that on one hand is stabilizing, as Frank said, he wants to end the war. He doesn't want to interfere too much with other countries' affairs, but it's destabilizing from another point of view where, there are global ramifications with using tariff and sanction too frequently as a negotiation tactic, as some people might call it a bullying tactic. Also, internally, I'm not an expert, but I wasn't sure if the government is that bloated in terms of having to cut so many people so quickly, how that will affect the function, of course, of maybe only in small places, localized function of U.S. Just government agencies, we are not sure. The thirdly is the paradox between U.S. wanting to shrink its current account deficit without wanting to give up U.S. dollar dominance, which is without wanting to give up capital account inflows, and how that is going to work out. Something that doesn't make economic sense, but they will keep trying. What kind of distortion and dislocation it will create for the rest of the world. And fourthly is the fiscal reconciliation bill. It seems like it's been a little stuck, and whether the world is ready, especially with potentially lower current account surplus to the U.S. and lower capital inflow into the U.S., how is that going to clear the treasury supply, especially when Mr. Besson said he wanted to do more long-term treasury issuance? How's U.S. dollar and the rate going to do is what we're worried about. But last thing I want to say on China is I think China is also respectful of what U.S. is trying to do, and it seems like Mr. Trump's pursuit of American first, evident in and it's the direct vicinities around it. For example, they sent Mr. Rubio on a 5-country tour to Central America as his first visit, which has never happened before, right? As the first trip. So it's a clear signal that maybe Asia trading bloc could be less targeted this time, or at least market will be pricing that probability, including for China, including for Vietnam. And this is something that market hasn't considered last year up to December. So that could be quite interesting for the next 3 to 6 months. I'll just stop here. I know there's a lot to cover, but Tom, what is your most burning question on China other than this?
Wow. I'm speechless, but let me try to re-kick myself here. I think what you said last was particularly interesting, but I want to come back to that later because that's the underlying shift. But I know that in our audience there's plenty of investors from China listening. So could you just then say, given all this, what's the implication from your view to the Chinese markets, China economy? And I'll say this, the setup, it's one thing for how reality is going to play out, but the setup and the expectation, Eva, was so negative. So the question then is, what is your view of the economy and the markets in China?
market is made on the margin. We've all known that since we've, been sort of in direct contact and trying to make sense of the market for more than 20 years, maybe in your case, more than 30 years. So it's made on the margin. So I'm quite excited because I'm quite excited.
I heard that, Eva. I heard that.
Yes, because as you know, I'm always just calling it as what it is. I'm excited not because I'm looking for a big fiscal relief package. I'm not looking for, big monetary stimulus out of China. I'm just looking at positive marginal changes and a butterfly effect it might trigger. Three things that happen over Chinese New Year. Number one is ever since the inauguration, the tone towards China has been more gentle than expected. And, the 10%, I think, well, Mr. Trump sort of have to do that. And I actually suspect the tariff for the world is coming. So it's gentler than we expected. And there has been a lot of indication that the US president is looking for cooperation. I won't call it a deal. He's looking for cooperation on multiple fronts with China. And he's made it very clear, which I fully agree, that if US and China put their heads together on global issues, there are very few things they cannot solve. I really believe that. And for him to signal that clearly is an olive branch, in my view, which is quite different from what market expected. If you look at China's performance, equity performance since 2018, it's been very clear that it was in part driven by market perception of China-US relationship and the risk premium associated with it. That's why H-share has been having a big discount, valuation discount versus its Asian neighbors and their emerging market counterparts like India. I think that was one of the big reasons. Secondly, maybe not many people were paying attention, but to me it's quite interesting is the management shift or management reshuffling of China Vanke, one of the most bellwether developers to watch on how China is going to resolve its real estate related debt issues. So, and the local SOE Shenzhen Railway Group took over Vanke, basically. Of course, there are a lot of other legal stuff to untangle, but this sends a positive signal to both domestic home buyers and financial institutions to continue support Vanke by either buying apartments or continue lending to them without too much worry of default. I think it hasn't solved the problem completely because it is a cash flow issue, but it is a step towards the right direction. And the third thing is DeepSeek. I want to say the first two things, US, China, and property, has been the biggest weighing down on China market's valuation on a relative basis versus the world. You could say earnings growth has suffered from multiple factors, but valuation has compressed a lot, including for RMB. RMB is not expensive. It just came with a risk premium. So these two things sort of reduce the market perception of tail risk and potentially could narrow the discount. But what's most exciting is that China presented the world with something that they could invest in or they can really see more growth from, which is DeepSeek. DeepSeek shook the world by using less than 1/20th of the cost to produce almost as good as, or even in some fact, by some measures, one of the best reasoning models. And it's open source. It proves that it's possible to use low cost small teams to innovate at a very high level. It basically, if you look at the US market since 2023, when OpenAI came out with GPT, it's been all about AI. And the perceived gap of AI development of China and US has been a big driver also of the valuation gap between US and China. And the unbreakable perception or consensus before DeepSeek is that AI is a US monopoly game. And we just have to pay the rent to NVIDIA. We need the best, most luxurious chip for brute force computing to make it possible for us to produce a respectable model. And DeepSeek shattered that consensus and produced another alternative. Of course, you know, the rent or monopoly profits, or the sort of the mystic aura that NVIDIA, you know, created for itself, having to have the most luxurious chip, most expensive chip to be able to do any of this is leads to, you know, market correction, decline of market cap, and so on. But if you really think about it, it lowers the price for the whole world, which in an economic sense will increase the volume and utility for the rest of the world. The pie theoretically should be bigger, although the monopoly profit people, NVIDIA and its supply chain, some of it in Taiwan, I mean, will take a smaller piece, but utility will be spread to all the apps and users. That is quite exciting. And in China, for the government to see this, I think it will give them more confidence to promote AI development and potentially deregulate in some of the areas to make it grow even faster, to, you know, and I think this provides people with a reason to buy, among other things. The two other things is probably just like US, China, and probably is rebalancing. And this is something to look at, and it's just the beginning. I think things will just only speed up. DeepSeek would be the first one, and then there are a lot of China big internet platform companies that are equipped with the capability to come up with their own models, and they will be encouraged to do so. The news flow will be quite positive, and we all know how good China is at this catch-up game. So it's a force to be reckoned in that sense as well. If you look at the global, even global FX has been impacted by this. But I'll stop here because I can go on forever. But no, that's also something interesting.
Tom, can I jump in and say one quick thing that I think is important here to the US and to Trump? And Ava has touched on this, and I think it's very important. How did Donald Trump react to the announcement of DeepSeek? You know, normally previous administrations would have said this is a national security risk. What is going right? There would have been a negative spin. The exact quotes from Donald Trump were, "This is a wake-up call for American industry. I view this as a positive. It's an asset." Quote unquote.
Wow.
That's the president of the United States talking about DeepSeek. So again, I think there's a shift, a very significant shift here. And I think this is an openness to all of Asia Pacific, not just China. And I think that the implications for Vietnam, you know, again, there's just so much going on here. And the markets just haven't caught up to this yet because he's making so much noise and doing so many things. But when you isolate it, Ava's done a great job sort of isolating that and focusing on it.
Yeah, I mean, totally agree. I think, oh, sorry, just to echo Frank's point here, I think some senators has came up with the bill to ban AI imports from China, which I think Mr. Trump already sort of indicated it's not a good idea at all, because you just can't compete on the price. Might as well, if US ban imports, it will become more, the US AI industry will in turn become more isolated. So as a businessman, I think his intuitive is right to embrace it, and it makes sense. Thank you.
So Eva, you're not done yet. I'm going to come back to you. Certainly, I'm going to carve some space then. In, you know, and the only echoing that I'll do before I transition it to Hung is that it's funny that you bring up DeepSeek in the context of U.S. relations, real estate. You know, if you would have told many of us I don't know the years, 5 years ago, what NVIDIA would do to the structure of the U.S. economy and the structure of the markets in the U.S., I wouldn't have believed you. So I'm glad that you highlighted DeepSeek, because for old people like me, I view DeepSeek as just a startup somewhere in China, you know, in AI. But what you're saying is that DeepSeek might have a much more profound impact on China and the markets than I would appreciate. And I would, before I transition to Hung, my own feeling is that a strong China, a strong Chinese market is good for the region and certainly good for the world. So it's good to hear you say that, Eva. Okay, Hung, it's showtime. And the reality is that, you know, for most of my career, I've said the only two markets and the only two economies that matter, Hung, is the US and China. Everything else is a sideshow. But today, because I sit in Ho Chi Minh City and I work for SSI, what I would tell everyone is the only three markets that matter to me are the US, China, and Vietnam. Everything else is a sideshow. So Anh, talk to me, what you've heard, how should we be viewing all this? And certainly we will have questions along the way for you, but I give you the stage. From Vietnam's perspective, how is Vietnam going to be impacted by what Trump is rolling out, and any insights you have in terms of the reaction that our leadership and our companies will have to the Trump action?
Hi, Tom. You are truly a sales guy, I guess. I think on the conversation, I think like for Vietnam, it's not the first time we see the superpower competition in the world, and as acquires a not very big country like Vietnam, I think if we consider like it's like a game, we cannot play that game once. We need to play that game like again and again. And in economics, let me be an economist a bit. If we need to play a game like repeatedly, we call it the reiterated game. And of course, when we play the game again and again, the economic theory, the game theory tells us corporations is the best option. So that's why for Vietnam, I think corporation means we are in the very perfect position, being a connected country. By connecting country, you know that we can connect in like the thing here we call the fragmented world, like for big economy like the US or China together, like you say, the big one. So that's why Vietnam can play out the game in that sense. And it's not a robotics, I think. I think a few weeks ago, we read the survey from THOÉI Japan, when they survey a lot of companies in Japan and China when they move their production out of Japan or China. And I see like when we got like 500 companies need to move, and they already moved. I think nearly about like 200 companies moved to Vietnam. It's a huge number. So I think like that's Vietnam fit in that story for what's going on in the world. And for the preparation here, I think we already, the government, I think yesterday, the Prime Minister already said about we are ready to prepare for the global trade war already. And the good thing about Vietnam at the moment is we got a lot of room for domestic growth driver. You may hear a story about Vietnam need to go about double digit in the next decades. Maybe for like outsiders, it's a huge number when we tell about double digit growth at the moment. But I think the potential for domestic growth is quite huge here, because it's the end of the 5-year cycle. So we lot of money to spend in infrastructure spending for this year, not to say about consumption on the very low base of last year. So, and for the market, maybe we got a lot of retail investor here. So we may say the valuation of Vietnam right now and in 2018 when it's super high, like 24 PE. Now we less than half of that, only 10 times PE for Vietnam. So I think it's no brainer to get get your feet wet a bit at the moment for Vietnam. So what we can say about how we as an investor to be prepared for what's going on. And if we got something like 10% of the additional tariff, I think the impact on the GDP Vietnam should be like minimal. I think 1 or 1.5% GDP is not a big deal. If we got 8 and then we be back to like 6 or 6.5% GDP growth for this year, I think it's not a disaster. So.
And Hung, I want to make sure I heard you properly, because I know that the growth rate for Vietnam historically, you know, it's been around 6-7% GDP growth consistently. Yes. And I actually have been maybe one of the lone voices in Vietnam, although certainly that's impressive growth. And Eva, you're going to laugh when I say this. I always say to people, geez, if Vietnam was, more similar to China in the way that, in sort of the way we operate, our GDP growth would probably be double digit, and I'm not an economist, but I just, having worked with China and know the intensity and focus of China, the Vietnam story at 6 to 7%, in my view, is actually sort of undergrowing. So back to Anh Hưng, I thought you mentioned something double digit. Could Vietnam see double digit growth with infrastructure spending and our new leadership and their focus?
Yes, you read it right. I think it's a target, and I think in order to get that very high level of growth numbers, because basically for Vietnam at the moment we see like the golden population here for Vietnam might not last very long. We got like 15 years to go, and it means the window of opportunity is quite narrow for Vietnam to grow in fast. And for the GDP per capita in Vietnam is about like 4,700, and it's not too high for Vietnam. So we want more. So I mean, with only 15 years to go, and that's why the government, they want to go a little bit fast to playing catch up at the moment. And that's why we start a lot of reforms starting from last year. You may heard about. We try to have some kind of like streamlining the government. We that's like a normal business. Like we try to cut the middle office. We try to make the government become like more powerful, so they can accelerate the implementation, because implementation is what will make the difference, not the target.
Great. I'm gonna just freewheel it, and certainly if you guys have questions for each other, Frank, I do have a question here. I think we get it that the tariff tool is not really, it may not be necessarily aimed at trade. Okay, so the question I'm asking is maybe a bit philosophical, is that the administration in the US, might they view Vietnam on different factors other than just trade? You get my question? And that's also an opportunity and a risk, meaning that, as we came into this administration, I never thought that the first economic tool punch would really be about fentanyl and immigration. Is that right? And so the question I have is, the way that we sit here in Vietnam and the way the press looks at us is that Vietnam and US relation is all about just trade. We have a surplus, they're going to go after us. But could there be other lenses that the US views Vietnam that could surprise us either on the positive or the risk side that we haven't thought about? This is unscripted, so I don't know if you are even prepared for that question. Right. You're muted. Yeah, you're muted. Yeah.
Sorry. You liked me being muted. I talk at you so much when we talk so much, as much as we do. Look, Vietnam, and by the way, let's celebrate the fact this is our 30th anniversary of diplomatic relations between the United States and Vietnam this year, 2025. It's a lot to celebrate. Is one, look, yes, of course it's trade. There's a very serious history here, the tragedy of the war, but it's also given an enormous, sizable Vietnamese population in the United States that has that relationship, right? And you think about that, we're not two different peoples in some ways. We've got those tight relationships. I remember before the election, I pointed out the fact that there were 45,000 people of Vietnamese descent or actual immigrants from Vietnam in Pennsylvania, which was the critical state that if Trump hadn't won Pennsylvania, he probably wouldn't have been president. 45,000 votes are a lot of votes, right? I live here in Washington, D.C. There are Vietnamese restaurants everywhere, and there's a huge Vietnamese population here, right? That is so important. So this is not some random two different countries that really have no relationship. There are deep ties there. The other thing is, and a much more focused sense, is that the U.S. and Vietnam have been working together in mutual defense and security for the region, right? And bringing greater sense of security to the region, because things do get very tense over there between the, and Vietnam playing that role between the U.S. and China. Let's just put it out there, right? That can play like, okay, guys, calm down. Let's work this out. Having another major country at the table to ensure security in the region, that's a huge positive. So again, I think there's a lot of opportunity here, and that Vietnam is seen as this growing economy, and is important for us, but it's also a place to go visit. There's a lot of history. There's a lot of relationships, right? And it goes back to my thought here. The Trump organization didn't just sign a deal for $2 billion to build a golf facility simply, and I'm sure a lot of it will be for people in the greater Asia Pacific region, but there'll be a lot of Americans coming over there too, right? So there's more here. There's a deeper. Let's put it this way: you think of the relationship between the United States and Ireland, right? Because there's so many Irish here. There's no reason that you don't have a relationship or build that kind of relationship with Vietnam, so that it gets into multiple different levels.
Yep. And so I'm going to point right back to THOÉI here, because I think there's this underlying shift that I'm picking up in this conversation, as well as in my conversations with global investors. And this alludes to a little bit of where Eva left off, is that could this new Trump be focused mainly on the Western Hemisphere, meaning Rubio is worried about, Latin America and so on. And because of Trump's deep respect, deep affection, deep admiration for China and President Xi and all the above, that you come to a world where US is focused in its own backyard. It respects what China is in its own backyard. How would this impact Vietnam and THOÉI in terms of, we have always traditionally played a balancing act, but hypothetically, if the Asian trade region becomes, shall we say, more China-centric, I don't know how it could be more, but let's say hypothetically becomes more China-centric, does this really change Vietnam's playbook any? Help me understand this, THOÉI.
I love the quote by Kelly Frank when he say we cannot teach the old dog a new trick, but in Vietnam we can say we can like freshen a relationship or renew some traditional growth driver. And in that sense, I mean, for the relation with China, we are neighbor for like 1,000 years. And sometimes people are a bit worry about something like a security concern and things like that, to say the least. But now I think after, I think the level of understanding between the two countries is much higher at the moment. And we can see one of the quick big example is that for Vietnam and China approved on a very big railway project in the north. It costs about 8 billion US dollar to connect the port in the north in Hải Phòng and Quảng Ninh to Lào Cai and then to China. Previously, it might be some like security concern when maybe a very big infrastructure project can be developed by financed by Chinese government borrowing, or maybe the winning bidder could come from China. But I think now when the level of understanding is better, so we can cooperate in more efficiently in the economic project, things like that. So I think it might be some of the change you might experience when we got the new world, right, and new area. So that's why we need to renew our relationship in that way, that security or something concern is still there, but we can still work with a very big project and that's going on the ground, I think.
Got it. And Eva, if I could ask you, because it's kind of a question to Frank, how does China view Vietnam? I know that because of our collaboration with Huata. I know you have done some work just looking at our, our economy, but how does China view Vietnam in the context of everything that we've talked about?
Well, we're great friends, of course. I think China views Vietnam as a very compatible, they call it cooperator, or we can coordinate on a lot of especially manufacturing supply chain, and the way industrial sectors are organized are very, actually it's the transaction cost is much lower for Chinese industries, in the context of basically offshoring to ASEAN. Vietnam is provides one of the smoothest transitions. We do need to have more cooperation in terms of infrastructure and maybe even like cross-border, value-added services, legal compliance, and so on, to enforce the cooperation and make it even smoother than it is going now. But there's definitely a lot of room for further cooperation between China and Vietnam, because China's ambition as well is to continue to climb up the value chain of both manufacturing and service sector and pushing the technology frontier. And Vietnam is positioned very well in terms of taking advantage of what's happening with China's economic scale and vast domestic market. And China can also benefit from Vietnam as a great complementary economy to further deepen its supply chain. So I think overall it's been going great, and there's a lot more room to go further for the two countries to grow together.
Great. And Hung, so given all that you've heard, and again, we have a lot of Vietnamese investors, our retail investors, any particular commentary in terms of sectors, in terms of areas that you would tell people to think about investing in?
I think like when the key growth driver for Vietnam for this year is domestic one, namely the public investment or investment into infrastructure. So some of the sector I think like quite okay for Vietnam for this year is on construction or construction material. The other interesting story maybe Vietnam share with China and the US in the way that if you want to boost consumption, it should coming from the middle class. So that's why if the middle class are feeling like a little bit well off, and we are Asian countries, so maybe property sector will be a key. If we see some improvement, further improvement for the property sector, so consumption could help to boost growth. And that's why otherwise, other from like playing with the consumption for sector, consumer sector, I think property sector should be a quite interesting sector at the moment. I know that some of the big name may frustrated the foreign investor for a while, but for some middle cap property developer, worth looking on. So that's my bet.
And back to you, Eva. Even though I claim that you're the best China economist, I secretly know that you're a great global economist. So again, and frankly, you're most well placed for a couple of these questions. The Vietnam story, in spite of the fact that we have incredible fundamentals, and I'm particularly excited about it, it still is an FX story, meaning that the market itself, at least in the short term, trades around the dong, the movement of the dong, the strength of the dong, and so on. So I do have a question for you, and of course, this will feed back into Hung and his big brain. Is how do you see the RMB sort of directionally? And then I also would love just how you see the dollar and so on, because at least from a short-term perspective, our equity market will be impacted by those two big currencies. So give us a perspective there.
Yeah, I think just purely from for the sake of economic analysis, extreme example of how asset prices will react when it's caught between its biggest trading partner's currency versus the currency it's sort of packed to, is Hong Kong. So when RMB is under depreciation pressure versus US dollar, Hong Kong market tends to underperform, but vice versa. Because when Hong Kong dollar is 100% pegged to the US, which means it doesn't have the adjustment mechanism, domestic adjustment mechanism for FX or exchange rate. So they need to use domestic inflation, and especially as a financial hub, asset price inflation to adjust for the competitiveness that was boosted or dampened on the FX side, or or the interest rate side that goes hand in hand with FX. So Vietnam has a sort of soft peg versus the US dollar as well, but China's biggest trading partner. So it's in some way resembles the Hong Kong story. So where RMB is going vis-a-vis the dollar is very important. I want to say two things about US dollar and RMB. First of all, it's about US dollar and US dollar alone. Of course, if we are expecting some sort of tariff from the US this year, the knee-jerk reaction will be for the rest of the currency of the rest of the world to depreciate some versus the dollar to counteract the loss of competitiveness from tariff from the US. That's what happened in 2018 and 2019. So US dollar might still have a last leg up because of the pending tariff threat. And we've talked about US fiscal and how long-term yield doesn't appear to be completely anchored at this point. And US with its deregulation, continued bloated fiscal deficit / fiscal stimulus, we will see broadly a widening gap between nominal growth of the US / cash flow generation ability of US corporates versus the nominal growth of the rest of the world versus cash flow generation capability for the rest of the world. But the rest of the world, to a big extent, has to import US monetary policy, has to suffer from higher dollar funding cost. Either it comes from a stronger dollar or higher rates. That is a long way of saying in a strong dollar environment, countries like Vietnam will have to go through some volatility and FX, because the funding cost is somewhat affected by the US, where domestic economy has their own cycles. So when the two cycles goes, divergently, it will create some problem. So this year, US dollar strength is something we continue to watch. However, the good news for Vietnam, and probably even better news for Hong Kong, is that I really don't think RMB has much room to depreciate. If you look at China's share in global trade, China's share in global current account surplus, it has been going up. And if you adopt rule of one price and ever come to China, just as a tourist, you will be astonished at how cheap and good the product is in China. A lot of my friends from Wall Street who came to Shanghai, stayed at one of the hotels, walked the street, and immediately covered their short RMB position because, RMB is really competitive in pricing, especially for the tradable sector. That's why inbound tourism grew 200% year on year during Chinese New Year. Of course, there's the visa-free boost, but everybody, all my foreign friends who came to China came in gushing about the high quality, like really low cost products and the sheer variety of it China's able to provide. And if China-US relationship improves on the margin, and I think it will reduce the risk premium for RMB as well. So we are actually quite positive on RMB exchange rate vis-a-vis the euro, vis-a-vis the British pound, and a lot of other currencies, vis-a-vis the Canadian dollar, for example, Mexican peso. We don't think the RMB fundamentally need to depreciate a lot. Of course, that's depending on how much tariff will be and how strong US dollar will become. But I don't see a reason for RMB to depreciate, notably against the basket at all at this point, because it's already really competitive. And look what's been happening to European share of global trade and manufacturing.
So in Hung, in your big brain, his mind is much smaller.
Oh,
Tell me what it says to you. Yes.
I think either make me a little bit worried in the sense that, yes, he say like, because last year, I a little bit worried for Vietnam consumption after Eva said that. Because you know that in Vietnam last year, traveling abroad is especially cheap. So people in Vietnam go abroad for tourism and they spend about 60% higher than previous years. And for this year, we do expect that consumption might, in Vietnam, domestic consumption might be normalized because maybe domestic tourism might be a little bit better. But if you say like traveling to to China and thing as extremely cheap there, so a little bit concerned. But just joking, I think.
Don't. Oh, sorry, Han. Just yeah. Don't worry. I will. We'll do a package tour for China,
Okay.
Vietnam for different experiences. No worries. Please go on.
But I think for Vietnam this year, I think we need to do something with, like I said earlier, more to the property sector. And not only we got a lot of like land related laws to be passed last year and then start to implement it this year. And I think the government now is more aggressive in the way they try to provide to accelerate the licensing approval. So we got more supply to the market. So I think when the property sector we doing right, so the consumption should be okay, so it would be better. And maybe I add one more sector for the question from Tom previously, because people still want to play out the story with the tariff. And I think if Mr. Trump follow the gradualism or softer approach for Vietnam, so maybe we still see some relocation of the manufacturing sector to Vietnam, and then industrial park place should be quite okay. And you may, I don't want to name anything, but some of the good deal as around, so maybe it's worth looking on.
Great. Look, I'm checking the time now, and I think we should wrap it up. I mean, I have too many questions that I can address, and what I would suggest for those of you who are listening who have follow-up questions, please reach out to your SSI representative, and we can certainly answer you post this call. As you can see, this subject matter, we could spend hours talking about it, and particularly with this panel, such experts. I just would leave with a general thought on Vietnam. You know, our chairman Hung of SSI recently asked our leadership team on just our thoughts about the Vietnam market. And, you know, frankly, my answer, if it matters at all, is that, you know, certainly the world is going through transition, particularly with Trump in the seat, and volatility clearly is here. But when I look at Vietnam, rather than calling it Year of the Snake, I'm calling it Year of the Catalysts. Vietnam itself has very intrinsic catalysts in 2025 that I think is going to make it a very special situation. As many of you have been following, we are being focused on being upgraded by FTSE. And our house view is that happens sometime towards the end of the year. There is also a lot of focus on the upgrade of the KRX system within our trading systems, which have been something being evaluated for many years, but it looks like it can be implemented this year. And then our new leadership, which has been very focused, as Hung has talked about growth and about development of our markets. We're beginning to see approvals of major transactions, which will bring more supply into the market. So this is not a sales pitch, Hung. This is the reality that in a world where there's many transitions going on, there's a lot of noise. The Vietnam story has its own intrinsic catalysts, and that's why I call 2025 the year of the catalyst for Vietnam. With that, I thank Frank. Frank, amazing insight as always. One of my takeaway from your commentary is that there is incredible strategy and there is incredible reason behind all this madness, and that we should think of Trump as Trump V2. This is and not think of as Trump V1, who was quite surprised that he became president. And I think that's actually a meaningful revelation, at least for me. And so I really appreciate for the insight. Eva, as always, thanks for being here and your view that, you know, obviously the US-China relationship is better than feared, and that there are some other factors that's driving the China story is also meaningful, because again, I reiterate, a strong China is good for the region, it's good for Vietnam, and certainly good for the world. And THØNG, as always, thanks for your insight for our retail and our local investors. And in your words, in some of our notes, we do expect the Vietnam market to be up double digit, probably somewhere around 15% from here, earnings growth to be robust. And again, it's a year of the catalyst. So with that, thank you all our listeners for joining in. Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Eva. Thank you, THØNG. And let's rock. Thanks. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Good night.